Let's talk about some of the memorable costumes in the Star Trek series.
Okay.
The first Andorian costume, an episode called The Offspring.
And that was on Enterprise,
Okay.
I think, was it not?
Not sure which one.
Or Offspring? I don't. Do you know what series that was? Because that.
Which one, Karen?
So that was one
Next
before.
Generation.
That was before me.
Okay.
I did not do that one. I did the later Andorians. But we can talk about Andorians.
Sure. Let's talk about Andorians.
Well, that they are one that is a holdover from the original series, and unbelievably challenging because, of course, one, they have little trumpet horns on their head and white wigs, and they are, without a doubt, so sinister, such sinister human beings. And I wanted to mention the actor's name, and I've just lost it. Jeffrey Combs. The Andorians were very sinister characters, and yet they had these sort of whitish skins or bluish skin, white hair, and these horns. And so when we did them for Enterprise, Mike Westmore made animatronics that went into the horns, so the horns moved with their puppeteers for each one. And I did them in these amazing sort of leather, dark browns and blacks and charcoal gray leather kind of high-waisted pants and peculiar jackets, and made them as sinister as possible. But the thing that sold it was Jeffrey Combs, who was an extraordinary actor, who is an extraordinary actor, and he played many of our great characters on Star Trek over the years. He's an excellent actor, and he's a good example of someone who came from classical theater and who has classical training. And you need to have that understanding of that it's a good thing to not look like yourself. That's really the way you want it to be. You want to be creating somebody from top to bottom, inside and out. And he was very good at that.
The Vulcan costumes.
The Vulcans, again, they came both from the original series and then from the movie. And they, the year before me, I think Dorinda Wood had done some Vulcan outfits. And so that sort of gave me a footprint to begin with. Because, of course, there's that thing. And, in the movies, they're all based on the kind of traditional Chinese gear. And so I slowly but surely started minimizing that to some degree, keeping kind of the width of things going, and a kind of softness, but something that had that just was my take on what they were, which was perhaps less florid than previously done.
Variations on the Klingon costumes.
Well, that was me just going crazy, because the only thing that on the Klingons that existed were the uniforms. And so I had to find ways to duplicate those in a very cost-effective way, because Robert Fletcher designed those for the movies, and they are, we used the core amount of those, which I think were 17 of them. 25 years later, we used them so frequently. They were amazing things made out of leather, and brilliant. Robert Fletcher, amazing designer. Brilliant construction. But we couldn't afford that, so we had to find other ways to do it, and we did. And they looked pretty darn good using vinyl next to leather, and you couldn't tell, and other kinds of bits and pieces to indicate but not necessarily replicate the original costumes. And you could mix them together, and it just looked like there was a ranking difference.
In Next Generation, an episode called Hollow Pursuits, there was a holodeck sequence where there were period costumes. Picard, Data, and LaForge were the Three Musketeers.
Correct.
Wesley as Gainsborough's Blue Boy.
Right.
And then Troy was a goddess of empathy in a flowing gown. What kind of
And I
challenge?
think Dr. Crusher was like some 18th century woman in a swing.
So you get the script, you see these kind of references to iconic sort of looks. Where did you go from there?
Well, the first thing I do is say, yippee! And then the second thing I do is go and just research until, I'm blue in the face. And I only get, the great thing, and we've talked previously about my Yale training, but that's one of the things that you were trained there, is that very quickly you would have to do in the first year, you have to do 3 projects a week, a set costume, a costume project, and a lighting project. And you would just have to be able to, if it was a Greek thing and you wanted to do Greek, you had to be able to synthesize that information really rapidly so that you could actually design it. And that's sort of what Star Trek was. I would have to go and find the imagery and synthesize it immediately, draw it up, take it to Rick, say, here's what it is. What do you think? Oh, that's great. Good. Goodbye. And go make them. And that's what I did. And it was fun. It was great. We did a lot of those on Next Generation, particularly because we had the holodeck.
I know the model makers often would actually buy kits and things and kind of create things out of existing parts sometimes.
Right.
With costumes, like something, as sort of well known as the story of the Three Musketeers, would you ever go to an existing, either on the lot or elsewhere, provider of costumes and then adapt them or play
Well, I
with
would
them?
go and look at them, but they would usually be so threadbare that they weren't up to the fantasy that the holodeck would produce.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm sorry. They're so threadbare that, can you see them or are they just moving? Okay. So you couldn't do that because they just wouldn't look to this sort of fantastic world. So we made all of that. For better or worse.
Let's talk a little about color palette, not just for 2 things. One, the regulars in the series, regular characters, and then when you did create costumes that were for special episodes, was there an attention to color as something that would sort of stand out in the Star Trek universe?
Right. Okay, as to the uniforms, of course, that was determined before I came on, the color blocks on the uniforms. So that was just a matter of finding a way to replicate that, week after week on yard after yard of wool. Purely a technical problem, but really an annoying one. And some of that was because we once we started, we ended up making, all the background, everybody. And so the background didn't get as much wear as the principals. So if you got to mid-season and you ran out of, say, the red or the teal or the gold, and you had to have it re-dyed, the color lot would not always come back the same way. And it was just harrowing. So we really learned to do more than we needed at the beginning of every season. And eventually we went to a commercial dyer and did an enormous amount so that we never had to do it again.
And then as far as how you might heighten the look of a costume that's an original for an episode, was there an attention to how you treat colors or what kind of colors you use so that they would, I think earlier you talked about people can see, especially for period pieces, if you're going back in time,
Right.
where they're familiar, but yet there's something odd or not quite the same. How did you approach that, and especially with color?
Well, with color was tricky because you never knew how it was going to be lit. And I learned early on that Rick preferred saturated color, kind of jewel tones and stuff, to pastels. So that would determine it, but it would really just me looking around and saying, you kind of have to look about, kind of what you did for the last 4 episodes, the last 5 episodes. And, if you are, if you did a red episode, or if you did an episode that had a lot of red and green or blue and yellow, that just wasn't cool to use those colors again in the upcoming episodes. It's the same thing. So color was very arbitrary and was really just an emotional response of mine to whatever I thought the episode required.
Now, Trek fans seem to pick up on the idea that if a character was wearing a red shirt, that they were surely marked for death.
Well, it seemed like the command. Yes, I know that one too, which is always funny. You know, if you come on as a guest actor and you're in a red uniform, you'll never be back. Is the
urban myth,
the urban legend? Yeah. And to that point, it's really true. They were the command. They were the guys that were leading the pack. Though we had lots of security guys, but more red uniforms were hit the ground than yellow ones did.
Back to some other of the memorable costumes. There was the false Vulcan ambassador in an episode called Data's Day.
Data's Day.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out the false Vulcan.
T'Pel, is that or T'Pel?
T'Pel.
The character's name.
Yeah. Vague memory of it. They all began with a T though, so it's
and a lot of apostrophes.
Yes, exactly. Was that a male or a female? That was a female.
Yeah.
And she's really a Romulan. Yes, she's dressed as a Vulcan, but she's really a Romulan, and she goes on for a couple of other episodes, I think, as a villainess.
The character Vosh.
Vosh was a Picard love interest, and she was kind of a fortune hunter that always had a scam or a scheme and would somehow lure him into it. And she was one of the first guest. She was actually. I'm trying to think if it was Captain's Holiday. Was her first episode.
There was an episode called Cupid. It's the one that's
Cupid, but that's
here.
later on.
Right,
that's
okay.
later on, because there's also the one that's Robin Hood, that she's also in. But that was one of my first times that a guest actress I had to make, be really beautiful, and this actress was really beautiful, so it wasn't a difficult thing to do, but it was a fun opportunity to do sort of 24th century safari clothes and all of that stuff. It was good. She had several outfits. She had a bathing suit, as I remember. She had a lot of things to do.
Dr. Crusher in The Nth Degree. Ring a bell?
Nth Degree does not ring a bell.
Okay. The introduction of an alien race, the Cardassians.
The Cardassians actually was introduced in the last few seasons, and I think like 6 and 7 of The Next Generation. And I had this idea of these sort of crustacean bipeds. So they would be very faceted, and I talked to Rick about it and sort of sold him on the idea and said, now the way to do this is we have to cast really skinny actors. And he did. They cast really, Mark Alimo was Gul Dukat, who was the lead in that. But the other actors were a guy named Time Winters. My Lord, I can't believe I'm remembering this. And there were 2 others. But those suits were made out of L200 foam that were glued together in these sort of faceted forms that went over stretch leather, so synthetic leather, and then they were upholstered with that, and then that was then appliqued onto these things so that we'd have sections of their body with this crustacean stuff built out all over it. And it was 209 pieces to just the foam. So there were 418 pieces, not counting the bodysuit that it was all built on. And it was all invisible zippers. It took forever to get into. Once they were in, they couldn't get out. It was miserable for these 4 actors for a few episodes, but it looked great. But then when we moved into DS9 and the Cardassians were going to be the main villains, I quickly said to Rick, we can't do that. So we have to just act like those other ones didn't happen and go in another way. So we can use some of the basic concepts of it, but we can't, there's no way we can produce that. And no way we can do it so that it's going to, these guys didn't really take any falls, didn't do any rough and tumble. And over the 7 years of the S9, those Cardassians hit the ground a lot.
By your description, a lot of these costumes are very elaborate.
They were.
Where does costuming end and makeup begin in something that's elaborate like that?
It ends if there is a texture change or a territory change, essentially, which they mostly were. They were, peculiar outfits with hands and heads that were different. The only one, those two that I spoke of, the tree and the water, and then the Suliban, which were villains in Enterprise, were the closest ones of doing kind of an all-in-one, where the makeup and the garment kind of blend together and they're all one thing. But we didn't do it very frequently because it's really hard to do. I mean, it's very complicated and it requires a lot of prep time to do that.
Can you talk about John Delancey's character, Q, costume for that?
Well, I again, because I came into the third season, Q had been his kind of judge's robe and his basic sort of naughtiness had already been decided. So I just had to do whatever it required. Eventually he appeared a lot in captain's uniform. So that was very simple to do. And then just I would do whatever the episode required. But all the court robes, that one episode, Dorinda Wood did, and so we just had to go and find that stuff. And eventually it was hard to find because it was being rented a lot, so we really rented it once, and then I just said duplicate that thing because he's going to come back, and we cannot spend as much time going through the rental houses trying to duplicate it. We just need to have one.
Whoopi Goldberg's character, Guinan.
Again, Dorinda Wood did that in the second season. I then exploded it in the third season. They were little kind of teardrop hats, kind of skull caps, so there's little teardrop things coming out on top. And then I met Whoopi, and she and I talked about, what was comfortable for her, and she was very easy. She really just didn't want anything that was close to body fit. So I just started playing around with texture and stuff, and I felt that those things were too diminutive and that we needed something that actually framed her face. And part of that's because, of her dreads and putting a cap over the dreads and then having the dreads come out the bottom. It just seemed weird to me. And so I felt like I needed more mass at the top. So I pitched to Rick to do a bigger, what we later called pizza hat, saucer hat for her. And it took many prototypes but we ended up using the big one, which was great because it would just frame her. She would always have this color, and she was always in jewel tones and really beautiful, kind of luxurious fabric. So she always looked so lovely, She has the most beautiful skin in the world.
When Leonard Nimoy returned as Spock, an episode
Right.
of Unification, what were the differences?
Again, I took the clothing to where I had already taken it, so that we didn't really use any of the stuff from the movies, and I just made new robes and tunics and pants for him to accommodate that look.
And the Borg.
The Borg started again. Dorinda Wood did that. She did so many things where she set them up, and there was something called popcorn spandex, and that is a kind of spandex that is knit with like a little kind of boucle, if you know what that is, but it's got all these little bumps on it. And she went around to a lot of the effects houses and got all of these rubber bits put together and put Velcro on the back of them, had them colored. They were black. She had them done as black rubber, and then kind of metallicized or made metallic She went around to a lot of the special effects houses and got casts made of different kinds of technical components, and then had them given a metallic sheen and put Velcro on the back, and they would stick them onto this popcorn. So those first ones took them like 2 hours to get the actors into the suit. And then if they did anything overt, if they did this, it would pop off. So when it came to me, I did those for a couple of years, and then they did the first movie with the Borg. And I'll think of the designer's name in a minute. Deborah, can't think of her last name right now. But she then did the first suits that were latex molds that were all in one. And then those are the ones we used following that. But then I took them and modified them some more, made them easier to get in and out of, because they really just glued them in when they were doing the movie. So you just got glued in with crazy glue for the day. And were told not to drink water. So I had to do it a different way.
In an episode called The Perfect Make, there a character, Kamala, in her wedding dress.
Yeah, beautiful. She had two beautiful dresses. That was Famke Janssen, and a wonderful, she had just come, she was just, I think, shifting her career from being a fashion model to an actress. And she's gone on and done a lot of big movies, and she's a beautiful, beautiful woman, and so easy. And the first one was that chiffon dress when we first see her, when she's out of the chrysalis, and she's just walking around, and she is to be this femme fatale. She is to be the perfect mate. And so I came up with this dress that was all pleated chiffon, and it would be pleated in places that it needed to be pleated, and not pleated in places that it wasn't. And the underpinning was made out of something called nude souffle, which is it was a version that they don't make much anymore, which is called the French souffle. It had very little stretch, so you had to just fit it, but you really would put it over skin, and it would disappear. In all of those Sonny and Cher shows, especially the Cher specials, Bob Mackie used that stuff, and that's those things that it looks like feathers are just coming out of her skin, but it's actually off of this souffle. And so we made this dress so that when you saw her in profile, all of the appropriate things were covered, but you could still see the undershape of her bust. And that was one of my first investigations on how to do a completely sensual, if not even sexual, costume and not show anything. And that was the first one. This did come down in a square neckline, and there was a little cleavage. But when you saw it on the side, it looked as if you were looking through one piece of chiffon. Clearly wasn't, but. And then she had that wedding dress, which was that huge, gigantic, kind of Balenciaga-esque wedding dress. That was amazing to do. And that first dress, we did around the clock in 24 hours. We got the casting at like 5, we worked through the night, that's what I have to say. And there were 3 people, one person made the skirt, one person made the midriff, one person made the top part, and then at the end it was all joined by the person that was leading the teams.
Did you go to the set a lot? Were you there when an actor came on the set with a spectacular costume, and there might have even been, crews can get pretty jaded and everything, but was there a reaction on the sets to some of the amazing costumes?
There was. I wasn't always there because, I would, there's always a show and tell for Rick. So we would get the actors all done up, and then we would take them in a cart or a van, up to his office, and then he would look at them. So, that, I knew nothing would happen from that point. So I didn't need to be on the set when it was established, because it was already established. Because once he said yes, there was nothing that anybody could say to change that.
I guess what I'm getting at was there still a fun aspect about just kind of
absolutely.
Introducing
absolutely.
a new...
And there were things that I would go over there, or there would be, episodes where all of our cast would be done up in outfits, all of the regulars, and we'd go over and just, the Robin Hood being one, the Sherlock Holmes being another, Time's Arrow, all of those ones that, we would go over and have a great time and just laugh. And, there was always nice things said, absolutely.
Patrick Stewart directed an episode called A Fistful of Datas.
Yes.
And you had to have, Worf had a look like from a spaghetti Western.
Yeah. They were all from spaghetti Westerns.
Right. Tell me about that episode.
Well, the hardest part about that episode is when, for Michael, he has a large head to begin with, and when you put the prosthetic and wig on him, he has this enormous head. So getting that hat made in a short amount of time was an extraordinary feat, to be done. I know it sounds so funny to say the hat, but it was the hat. But Michael was, he was they were always so happy to be out of their uniforms that there was hardly a time when anybody balked at any of that. They were always so delighted to be out of their suits. And so it was always it was a lot of fun. That part was a lot of fun to do.
What was it like working with Patrick Stewart as a director?
Terrific, very well prepared, easy, understood it. Same thing with Avery Brooks. Was also remarkable as a director.
The costumes for Time's Arrow, it's a 1890s San Francisco look.
Right.
Anything particularly challenging about that, or just?
Well, the most challenging part of that is Whoopi was unavailable. So as you might remember, she had 3 large Victorian gowns, and they were all made on a dress form. And she came in like an hour before she would go to makeup, and we would put them on her, and all we would do is adjust the hem, because they all worked. And that was Renee Nault was the cutter fitter on those, and it was amazing. It's unnerving because you think, okay, I'm doing all this complicated work. There's fringes, there's beads, there's big leg and button sleeves. We're using this fabric we're putting the medallion here, whatever we're doing on it, and you think, oh my God, this is all going to be a disaster. And then it all works out to be quite amazing.
The character that Kirsten Dunst played as an alien girl, Hedril.
Oh, I don't remember.
Any costumes that we didn't mention that really stand out, or any favorites for you?
There are favorites for me in the latter part. There were a lot of things in Enterprise that I really enjoyed doing. Enterprise was interesting because, of course, it was a prequel. So it was a little bit like the Star Trek movie, but before that, before the last Star Trek movie. And so the uniforms were more NASA and less Star Trek. Right. And they were the most complicated uniforms we did. They had 17 zippers on them, and all those patch pockets and all that stuff. But I thought that the cast looked really spectacular. Now I got to say, all of those guys were terrific, and with Scott Bakula leading the pack, and that is a person who has great self-esteem and is very easy with himself and understands what his role is. And he really understood what the role of captain was, and took it on beautifully and wore the clothes wonderfully. So those uniforms I was very proud of. And I was very proud of the away suits, which we had to do in a very short amount of time. It was the second episode, and it was a lot. It was an enormous amount, and cost an enormous amount, and I'm very grateful that they willingly came up with the money to do it, and even at that, they were heavy and uncomfortable and difficult to wear over long periods of time. But Scott never complained once about it. It was amazing.
What was a typical time, if there is a time, in terms of, well, from the time that you first started drawing, getting the script and drawing, to the completion of a costume? How long would that take?
If we're lucky, 7 days. We get the scripts about 1 week, one shooting week in advance. That's 7 shooting days, but that's 5 days and 2 days, or whatever it is. That adds up to 7 weekdays.
And
I read. I get the script. Everything stops. I mean, all my work stops at that point for the script, and I read the script, and I take notes, and I start sketching. And I get, hopefully by the next morning, I have a stack of little sketches, and sometimes there's swatches, sometimes there's not. One of the things that I was able to do is that several of the fabric stores in town went out of business. And so I was able to go, I had been a good customer, so they would have these sort of, pardon me, in quotes, fire sales. And so they would sell me really remarkable pieces of goods for really remarkable prices, and sometimes by the pound. And so I would just get, 100 pounds of this kind of fabric, 75 pounds of that, 25 pounds of that. And so we had a huge rack, the width of our workroom, by about 12 feet with just fabric bolts in them. So sometimes I could just go back there and do shopping immediately and swatch stuff. And if it wasn't the whole thing, I could at least give an indication of what I was doing. And then I would meet Rick the next morning. I would meet Rick at his car and walk him to his office, because as soon as he was at his desk, all hell broke loose and you couldn't get in. So I set up this thing with him that we would chat and walk from his car to his office. Now, sometimes we would be deep in discussion, and I'd get him for 15 more minutes in his office. Sometimes the work was done in 5.5 minutes, and that's all it would be. And I learned to operate that way. I learned how to be concise, not have to gab a lot about it, and tell him what I thought what the concept for the garment was, and what I thought the character was about, and am I in the ballpark? And off we go. If there was a script that was really vague, I would try to get him on the phone after reading and see if he had a slant before I started. A lot of times he would say, I don't know, you better show me some stuff. So I would do a kind of an A, B, and C. Here's one way to go, here's another way to go, here's a third way to go, and see which of those would work.
In your process, would you do all of the drawings, or would you assign to your team some of the costumes that might be less important in terms of what the characters were?
No, I did it all. When we would do big pilots, I would bring a sketch artist in, but I don't know how, I do all my thinking with my pencil. So it just took longer to have a sketch artist do it. Now, I would sometimes have a sketch artist, and I would draw up what I thought it was and hand them this and say, now make this look beautiful. And I would do that. But ultimately, it all has to come from me, because I can't think through someone else's hand. It just doesn't work for me. There are many that do. I'm just not one of them.
Among the executive producers, was Rick Berman the chief one that you would have to go to for approval of costumes?
Correct.
Okay. And you said you usually on a 85% of the time you got it. The 15% of the time where you would get some input. What's the kind of input that Rick Berman would give you?
Oh, well, he would. I misspoke. What I meant by that is, by the time they came up and he had to look at them, wow. When they were constructed, 85% of the time they were pretty much on the money.
Okay. Well, then in general, what input?
He would have lots of input. He would talk about character, or he would talk about maybe I pushed the envelope too far and we need to come back, and just things that he felt that he would have a sense about it. For the most part, especially in the latter half of my time there, we knew each other's minds pretty well, and he knew where I would go and what I would do.
Did he have the final say? I mean, did it go as far as like a studio level or anything like that? Or
well, sometimes if we were establishing something that the studio had requested, if they, for instance, on Voyager, there was a character that started, Kess, the little elfin girl, and she and Neelix were partnered. but they couldn't figure out where to go, it could go, and it wasn't attracting the 18 to 43-year-old males. So they got a directive from the studio and the network that they needed to come up with a new character. And budget-wise, they couldn't add a new character, so they had to phase Kes out and bring in 7 of 9, which was Jerry Ryan. So we had these long talks, not long, but we had several talks on the phone. And I came up originally with because she was a Borg who was being rehumanized, I came up with this. I wanted to try to do something that looked like she was a Varga girl. Because as soon as I saw Jerry Ryan, I said, okay, I can do this. Because this is an amazing, if I was a sculptor, I would say this is an amazing armature. I don't have to do any work here. All I have to do is just find a way to make something look like it's spray painted on her, but not be spray painted on her. And so we came up with that corset that was made out of stretch fabric with stretch surgical tubing on it, so she could move completely in it. That then was into a specially formulated underpinning bra, if you will, that had you couldn't see it, anything, you just couldn't see it. And then this unbelievable stretch fabric that was sprayed silver, kind of dotty, it wasn't solid, flat silver, but it had a little bit of speckle to it that went over her shoes. So she had to have it all scrunched down, put her feet into the shoes, and then inch it up, all the way up. And when it got to her bust, we actually constructed the bra so that this thing fastened under her bust line and then came back over. So you actually got the shape of her breast and it came up and it had like 1.25 inch turtleneck. And it was down to here and covered her shoes. And it was the sexiest damn thing you'd ever seen in your life. And I mean, that was something that she did walk on the set and the joint went berserk. Now there was problems lighting it, and we had to get rid of that suit. But I do remember that sketch was submitted to the studio, and it came back to me with a red mark that went down like that. And I said, Rick, I can make this so that we don't have to do a cut down neck, and that people will be salivating when they see this. And that's what happened. And we kept that form. We eventually changed it and opened it up a little bit and made it more vulnerable looking. But in the beginning, those first 2 or 3 episodes that she wore that silver thing, it's amazing. Her first, I don't know if you remember, but she turns out of the shadows in that suit and just walks into a light, and you just go, va va voom. She's in part profile. It's pretty amazing.
Well, that's a pretty famous costume from
It
the
is a
whole
famous, yeah.
Star Trek line, and it certainly attracted attention beyond the set.
Right.
How was Jerry Ryan about wearing it, and kind of her attitude, and how was she?
Well, it was another one of those things that looked so simple on, but took like 40 minutes to get into, so that over a period of time becomes daunting. But she was never ungracious. She was never unhospitable. I knew that she had to come earlier than she wanted to come to get into her outfit, but she was never ungracious. She was wonderful. She was terrific. And a lot of people are not like that, and don't have that kind of generosity of spirit that she has, and understood that there were more things, and also knew she looked like $1 million in it. So.
Now she was in Voyager. Was that costume modified at all during the course of the run?
Yes, it did. It changed color, and then the neckline dropped into a kind of a scoop. As she became more human, we took a lot of the armoring away from it.
Do you think that's the costume that might have had the most impact certainly among males, but I mean, it seems like it was talked about a lot.
It was talked about a lot because it's, part of it is that, people would come to me and say, how did you get that to go back up under? It's a stretch fabric. Stretch doesn't do that. It goes from mountaintop to mountaintop. It never goes into the valleys. And so I was going over a complex, or a compound curve, and was able to do it. And that was Esther Hamoyan, was the cutter fitter who did that, and she was the one. And I just kept saying no, and she kept recutting it and recutting it and recutting and coming up with another idea on how to do it. I mean, I was there saying, well, can't we, if the tension line is here, can't we fasten that under her breasts then? Can't we do that? But every 3/8 of an inch there was a hook, an eye. So when she got in it, all of those had to be hooked in order to get it on.
So was the basic challenge to make it look like it was a skin type costume, but in fact, not really reveal every nuance of her anatomy?
Correct. The goal was to make it look like a Barbie doll that had sort of these tubes on her rib cage.
Now, what about ideas that maybe just didn't work for you? You started them out, it turned out to be maybe a bad idea. Have you ever had to just start from scratch on a uniform or a costume or anything?
Well, there's some that you keep hoping that will work, and I can't. There are two different ones, and I can't remember the aliens. But there was one in which it was really quick, and they wanted a lot of them. They wanted 17 or something. And they cast this guy that had this really amazing sort of beautiful bodybuilder. He was a good actor as well. And so they wanted to show that. And so there was this stuff called 3M foam. It's also referred to as spiral foam, and it's used for air conditioners. And so I thought, so why don't we just put them in black jumpsuits and, we'll cut them down and then we'll make these little tunics. Well, they were just butt ugly. There's just no two ways about it. They were the ugliest things you've ever seen. And it was too late. We just had to. And then there was a black and red makeup deal that Mike did. Both Mike and I, we were off base on it. It did not work. That was one. There's another one, and I can't think of the name of the one that I really liked, but and then later, 3 years later, we find out that oh yeah, we really did like them. Now that we revisited the episode, and oh yeah, those looked really great. But in the moment, I had to talk and dance, sing and dance to get those things, not to have bits of it taken away.
When it came to a point where there might be a disagreement between you and Rick Berman about a particular costume, what would be the kind of things you would try to sell it with, or to pitch to him?
My real goal was to never have a disagreement with him, was to really see if I could get it in the drawing stage fairly close to the mark. And in the construction part, if I was having an issue, I would bring pieces up to him and show them to him and say, okay, this is what I'm heading towards. Does this still seem all right to you? And because I knew that at some point you have to finish the garment. If the garment is the worst thing ever produced on the planet, it still has to be there at 7 a.m. with a rolling camera. It's not a movie where you can say, oh, it doesn't work, and we'll wait for an hour and a half. We'll relight the scene or something while you fix that. You can't do that in television. It's not possible. Television is just like movies, except it's really quick.
Were costumes something that the actors bitched about from time to time? And if so, did that help you to even make changes in how you designed?
No, not really. There were, everybody has a bad day. And you come in and you don't want to be there, and you've got to be there for 3 scenes and you've got 4 lines. And you would rather be anywhere. Root canal work would be better. And so it's going to be too tight, it's going to be too loose, it's going to be too big, it's going to be too small, it's going to be too short, too long, something.
What about guest actors coming into that whole world of Star
Well,
Trek and the costumes?
as I mentioned, the thing about most of the guest actors is they were theatrically trained. So they're used to uncomfortable clothing that they would wear for 3 hours a night. Right. And so and a lot of them, because of my association with the American Conservatory Theater, and as I said, that theater, the Pacific Conservatory of the Performing Arts in Central California, I would say 70% of the actors came through I had already worked with in theater. So they were so happy to see me. So we had a lot of fun.
You won your first Emmy in 1992 for an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation
Yes.
called Cost of Living.
Yes.
First of all, what was it like to win an Emmy?
Well, it was great. What's not good about winning? Oh my gosh, it was terrific. It was one we put a lot of work into. It was one that there was a lot of coverage. I had already lost 2 or 3 times. It was like my 4th nomination or something. So it was, it was gratifying. I was happy that Majel starred in it. Will Wheaton.
What stood out about the costumes?
Well, it was kind of a circus. It was with Worth's son. That's what it was. It wasn't Will Wheaton. It was Worth's son. And so it was kind of there were jugglers and fire eaters, and it was all this imaginary planet of fantastic characters. So, you could just do anything. Nothing had to really. It all, of course, was unified, but you didn't have to work at total unity if you were doing the Montagues or the Capulets or something. You could have things that fit together in the puzzle, but didn't look like they were exactly perfect.
And then you repeated the next year in 1993. You won an Emmy again for an episode called Time's Arrow Part 2.
Right.
Describe the costumes? What was the impression?
Well, those were all those Victorian costumes we've already talked about, and we had a lot. I mean, all of our actors got into Victorian dress in that, and Gates was a nurse and we did a beautiful, ticking dress on her. She looked spectacular, and I forget all who the other characters were, but it was great. Marina and Gates both had great ball dresses at the end. So they just got to do really beautiful, wonderful dress-up clothing. It was great for them.
I'm going to mention some of the names of people that you've worked with, and if you could just give me a brief, almost like word association,
Okay.
a thought, a comment,
Okay.
something. Starting with Rick Berman.
Oh God, too many thoughts. Okay, here we go. Rick Berman, very astute, very intelligent, a brilliant eye. He really sees as a producer should see.
Michael Piller.
Michael Piller, funny, really intelligent, wonderful scripts.
Jerry Taylor.
Jerry Taylor, glue, a wonderful writer, but she was the glue when she was there on Voyager. She was the thing that really held it together and really understood the collaborative spirit. She's a wonderful woman. Oh my God, great.
Carol Coons.
My sister, my best friend. There's no one better at her job than Carol Coons in all of the industry.
Patrick Stewart.
A gentleman, a brilliant actor, a wonderful Shakespearean actor, as well as actor.
Jonathan Frakes.
A good guy, pleasant, always fun, the guy that wants to make sure that there's no tension. He is a problem solver.
He directed several episodes,
Yeah,
too.
he did. It was fun. It was great.
Brent Spiner.
Brent Spiner, another excellent actor. I always think of Brent as everybody had a picture frame this big to work in to do their job. And so they could fill out and they could go over here and go into this corner and so on. Brent had a picture frame this big. And some episodes he filled that bigger than other actors filled the big frame. And it's just that he could make so much out of so little. It was extraordinary to watch, just what he could do. It was wonderful.
LeVar Burton.
Oh, a wonderful human being. He also directed a lot of episodes as well. A wonderful human being, a great support, of course, a fine actor, but a wonderful director, really terrific director.
Marina Sirtis?
Ah, I love Marina Sirtis. She's great. She, again, gracious and loving and funny. What a great sense of humor she has. She, in another life, she'll be a stand-up. I mean, she's brilliant and a really fine actress, I think.
Michael Dorn?
Wonderful guy, kind of a big lug, and charming to deal with. Never a problem. Really, not hard to deal with at all.
Gates McFadden?
A beautiful, beautiful woman, and tall, lean, that porcelain skin. Also an excellent actor. Did her job well, I felt. I think that I know that there was trouble in the first season, and then she wasn't there for the second season, but she came back in the third season, and she calmed down. She, we became great friends when she was pregnant, and I had to disguise her pregnancy while she was on the show, and fairly successfully. Those lab coats just got bigger and bigger and bigger, but no, she was a good sport.
Denise Crosby?
Lovely woman. Only got to work with her 2 or 3 times, 4 times, but really liked her a lot. Thought she was also splendid.
Will Wheaton?
Will Wheaton, worked with him on and off.
Right.
A very intelligent kid. I felt he did a good job.
And Whoopi Goldberg?
What can you say about the Whoopster? She's not much different in real life than she is on The View. She's really a real person. She's not difficult to deal with. She doesn't make a fuss. She doesn't, she's game. She knows what she signed on for, and she does it.
I've heard the word earthy used often with Whoopi. Is that
absolutely. Oh yeah. And congenial and just pleasant as all get out.
You were on The Next Generation for 5 seasons. Is there anything that stands out as sort of a proudest achievement or proudest moment for you for that series?
No, this is the hardest question. I'm always asked, what's my favorite costume? And my answer is always the next one. There are things that I'm proud of because they were like physical feats that were achieved. And, but really, I'm more proud of the bulk of the work, of the body of the work, than I am of an individual thing.
Let's talk about Deep Space Nine. When you first heard that there was going to be a series, what was your reaction? And you were in the midst of still working on Next Generation.
Absolutely. Well, my initial response was, I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to do it. Rick won't let me do it. So I went up and I pitched really hard to do it, number one. And as it turned out, he wanted me to do it. Excuse me. I thought it was interesting that it was going to be kind of, in quotes, the Grand Hotel. And it seemed like it was going to be challenging and a lot to do, but it would be an interesting thing to do. And as it turned out, it was challenging and a lot to do and very interesting to do. We refer to it as the dark middle child because it's between Voyager and the Next Generation, and it had a really darker, sinister may be the wrong word, but a kind of sinister feel about it.
When you heard about this series, I'm imagining that you had a pretty full day, a pretty full life with the other series. Did you have to modify how you were working on Next Generation to be able to just fit this new series?
Well, I doubled the crew. The crew got doubled, and I got an assistant. And the assistant was someone who would just, it wasn't really an assistant. It wasn't an assistant designer. It was a costumer who was assigned to me specifically. And I might go out and swatch a whole bunch of stuff and then come back, and it would all be labeled, and then I would make my decisions, and then she would go out to those different merchants and pick up the goods and all of that stuff, and on a moment's notice. And so that took a lot of weight off of me. My job really became designing and getting things going in the workroom, fittings, designing, getting them approved, getting things into the workroom and getting the fittings done. And that's really the way it was for 7 years. And that became my day. We had long days. I mean, a lot of, I'm very hands-on. So a lot of times I'm over there sticking stuff on the garments, until it finally looks right.
When you first heard about sort of the tone of the series, the kind of darker tone, was it exciting for you to think about the challenge of designing costumes for that series?
Well, yeah, and the fact that the bulk would be much more, that we would need to have kind of a bulk of 40 to 50 extras to start out with. That would just be different races, different aliens on the planet or on the station. And so that was very interesting to do. The fact that the aliens would be coming to them rather than the ship going to the aliens was an interesting idea. Taking the Ferengis and developing them into something, because I did the first, Dorinda did the uniforms for the Ferengis, and then there was I think it's called Captain's Holiday, the Ferengis try to steal Vosh. It's an episode with Vosh, and they needed to be in beach wear. And I put them in this really funny beach clothing that Rick loved. And it became sort of the basis for Quark and all the Ferengi civilians and all the businessmen, which was completely outrageous. I mean, it was over the top and around the corner. And they let me do it.
How did your initial vision for that series and the producer's vision come together? I mean, was there a meeting of the minds or long discussions?
Yeah. Well, there's always discussions, but you're taking a lot of it from what they say. So there'll be certain buzzwords of some kind that will come up, and then you will, say, I get 2/3 of that. So let me work on that 2/3 and see if the other third is really essential or not.
Okay, here comes the compare and contrast question.
Oh.
Basically, the costumes for Next Generation versus the costume for Deep Space Nine. Were there similarities? What were the essential differences?
No, which part of the costumes are you speaking of? The uniforms?
Just in general, maybe just overall.
Well, I think
certainly the uniforms.
Well, the uniforms were different. We went to a one-piece jumpsuit that zipped down the front. We inverted the colors. They were black with gray collars, and we made them. Actually, they didn't start that way. They ended that way when we did the first movie. But we made them more somber, more serious. As far as the guests to the Grand Hotel, as it were, any variety of things. But it allowed me to do much more sort of lush things. So things were in many ways, and lush not necessarily meaning ornate, but where I might have done one layer, I could do 4 layers somehow, and it would work out. And part of that worked out because I had 2 workrooms, because we were still doing the Next Generation. So I had 2 separate workrooms working under the same roof, 2 different teams. So one week, one of the shows may have very little to do. So I have one person working on uniforms. Well, they're still being paid. So I take them and have them double up on this other thing so I can do more, because the labor costs are the same. It's just the fabric cost, which is the cheapest part of the equation. So I could get more bang for the buck for both shows by having the double workroom. And we found that out very early on.
Okay,
except when you end up doing 2 big episodes in the same week. And then you just go, oh, well, it works until it doesn't work.
Okay. We're going to tape change.
Okay.